You're going to craft a story pitch for your final feature project. So, a story pitch is when you toss an idea to your editor or producer for approval. And that's a regular part of your job description, pitching a story. So, let's look at what makes a good pitch and what makes a not so good pitch. First of all, there's a story, actually. Now, it sounds funny because you're pitching a story, but sometimes there's really no story there. So, how do you know there's a story? Something happens in the story. There's a specific focus, there's a central question. Usually, every story has a central character who has some kind of conflict, some kind of problem. There's something at stake here. There's an issue that has impact on your audience. There's something of prominence here. There's going to be news value, all the news values that we talked about, but it's going to be a narrow focus, right? So you wouldn't talk about parking being a problem at LSU. That's too broad of a story. But what about that person who has to travel already, maybe in 45 minutes to get to class, and then spends another half an hour? Maybe even the time that it takes for people to find a good parking spot could be a way to have a narrow focus on that story. So all good stories, I don't care if you're talking about a cartoon, a book, a true story, a fictional story, a story based on fact, is going to have a person, a character who has a problem or faces a challenge, right? And is working toward a solution. So all good stories have that. This is something easy for you to remember. So good stories are fair, accurate, interesting, thoughtful, and human. So we've talked often about that human piece of a story, and it spells out the word faith. So that might help you to remember that you want your stories to be fair. You want to show the different sides involved, accurate. You want to tell the truth, all the different parts of the truth. You want it to be interesting, right? What is there something that we can identify with, something new that we learned, some different side of a story that we wouldn't have known before? It's thoughtful. It shows that you spent time meeting people, getting to know them, and learning about them, and then communicating what you learn. And it's human. Everything's about people. People make the world go round. A story always has to be about a person. A photo, anything that you do, you want to focus on the people involved in the story. So a pitch demonstrates reporting, actually. Now, you haven't even written the story, but before your pitch, that you have at least reached out in some way to find out whether this is doable or not, right? Maybe you've looked online to find some information, or you've checked social media, that you've gathered a little bit of information already, that the story has legs. You might hear that. It's going somewhere already. And you, before you pitch that story, you already know that it has legs, that it's a possibility, that you're not reaching in the dark or anything like that. And that you identify the key players in the story. So I'm going to give you some instructions on who those key players might be in the story that you're going to do. But you have done some specifics here. You've tried to see, hey, there's something here. It's not just an idea, but this is a real story that I can sink my teeth into. Now, a good pitch is not going to be super long, right? So a paragraph is plenty. If you can't tell me what your story is about in a sentence, then you really don't know what the story is about, right? However, you should know your editor, you should know your producer, because some expect more or less brevity than others, more or less information. So you're going to find out exactly what your editor, which is me, right? What do I want in your pitch? And I'll show you that. Now, a good pitch is surprising, right? It's something that you would find interesting enough to tell a friend if you're out having a meal and say, hey, you're not going to believe, listen to this interesting person I met, right? It's something that will make your editor curious, something your editor didn't know. Now, editors know a lot of stuff, right? So you really want to find something that's new. And there's a new story every time you turn around. So that's not hard to do. The more stories you write, the more stories you pitch, the more stories you do video, audio stories on. Actually, every time you do a story, you find another story or 2 or 3 stories. And so you could really tell stories all day long, 7 days a week, and never run out of good ones. So your good pitch is not predictable. It's not a story that I'm already heard. It's not a story that has been in the news. It's something different. So let's look at your pitch for this assignment that you have. So your pitch is going to have some elements. So the story that you're going to do for our assignment is a story about a person who has an interesting job or hobby. So that's going to be the story that you're going to write for your final feature. And so, not someone with a normal job, right? Now, this person can have a traditional job, but brings a different twist to that job. People who have interesting jobs or hobby are very passionate about those, and they're really fun to interview. You get a lot of good material from people like that, and they love to talk about what they do. So that's why I'm going to pick that for you. So what does that person do? What's the name of the person? What makes a subject different from others like him or her, right? In other words, why did you pick this person? What about this person make it that you find interesting? So, you have to write the story and you have a choice here. So find someone you're interested in, right? Why did you pick this person? Now, I'll tell you right now, it cannot be somebody you're related to and your best friend. Now, because those are the hardest people to write about because you know too much, you're going to overlook interesting details that because you already know the person. So we can't, I will stalk you. I will find out if that's your best friend. So don't do it. The best stories, the most fun stories, the easiest stories about people you never met before. It really is. Now, you're going to interview a secondary source. That's going to be a coworker, maybe a friend, a customer of this person to get a different viewpoint of that person, what that person does. And so now, the truth is you may, once you interview a person, find another secondary source you'd prefer to interview. So again, this is a pitch. This is what we intend to do. But whenever you find something better than what you pitched, a question, an idea, your secondary source, you're going to go in that direction. And we can always talk about that. So what background information do I need? In other words, if my source is a person who crochets, well, I need to, in really simple terms, explain what that is. What kind of hobby that is. If the person has a particular disease, then in layman's terms, I need to explain what that is. Background information is information that allows you to understand the story, allows people who might not be familiar with that sport, that hobby, that job, to understand those pieces and terms of it that your speaker might discuss. So we feel like we're part of the story. We're not on the outside looking in. So what background information? So don't get freaked out about that term. That's just background. If you tell me that your person works in a restaurant, then how many other employees work in that restaurant? What are the hours? What are some of the duties? Sometimes you get that information from your source. Sometimes you might get it from some other place. Now, for your pitch, it's okay with me if you do paragraph form or bullet points. That's really okay. But your pitch, what your story's about, go ahead and write a sentence for that. So here's an example of a story pitch. So my feature story is about Susie Q, who drives the Tiger Trails bus. Q has been driving the bus for 15 years. Now, why do I want to write about her? There's plenty of bus drivers, right? But Q is different because she hands out candy when we get on the bus, and she also leads sing-alongs with riders on rainy days. Now, that's a different kind of bus driver, right? So now I get why you want to do this person. There's something that stands out about Susie Q that makes you want to do a story that makes you believe that other people would be interested in reading about her. Now, you've also seen Q talk to students when they're down and on her late night shifts. Maybe she talks to people who've had a little bit too much to drink. And so she's a parent figure maybe for students who ride the bus, right? So your secondary source could be this student you met who rides the bus and spends a lot of time talking to Q and really admires her. So we get to find out from someone who rides the bus what Susie Q is like. Some possible background information would be to tell us what a Tiger Trails bus even is. How many students does she drive on a typical day? How many hours does she work? How long are her routes there? And so little things like that help us to you drop us down into Susie Q's life a little bit, and then we get to know about her. So your pitch is due at the start of next week, right? It's due typed by Monday at noon. And because the reason I want to read your pitch, I want to make sure it's okay, and then give you the go-ahead to start moving forward. We're going to talk about interviewing. So once you create your question list, you're ready to interview your person. Now, this is part of your final feature grade, so you don't want to not turn this in. This is an important part of your storytelling. Once I give you the okay, then you can contact the person. And what you'll do is tell them who you are. If you don't know the person and you haven't met the person yet, you can say, my name's Roxanne Dill. I am taking a media writing course at LSU, and I'd love to interview you for my feature project. My friend told me about you. She rides your bus often, and you're a favorite for her and her friends. So you introduce people, tell them who you are, exactly what you want to do, maybe even give them a time limit. Say, if I could ride in the bus with you on a route and get to kind of watch what goes on, and then I'd also like to maybe spend about 20 minutes talking to you. So you're really specific, and we're going to go over that when we talk about interviewing, but you always give people a heads up exactly what's going on. You can contact the person. If you haven't already, you might say, are they willing to do the story, right? And you can tell them, I'll call you back and we'll set up an interview. Once you feel like you've got your question lists all set up, and we're going to work on that next week, then you can go ahead and contact that person, right? We're going to practice making questions. We're going to practice interviewing. We're going to talk about good types of questions, because remember, you're on a hunt now. You're looking for those good direct and indirect quotes, and so we want to have the right questions for that. Now, what's your story, right? So you probably already know